So I'm now going to call Australian Dairy Farmers.
Yes, hello Chair, it's David Innold, Chief Executive Officer here, and I'm joined with three colleagues.
Fantastic. Well, it's Glenn Stirl here, and we are, I am joined by Senator Pauline Hanson, Senator Gerard Rennick, Senator Susan McDonald and Senator Matt Canavan. So I'll just get through the official part of welcoming you. So I now welcome representatives from Australian dairy farmers via teleconference. And for the Hansard record, if you could please state your name and the capacity in which you appear. And I'm seeing all the names in front of me, so why don't I start off? Mr. Hoff, you're there?
Yes, that's correct. Craig Huff, I'm the Director of Strategy and Policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Inall?
Yes, David Innold, Chief Executive Officer, Australian Dairy Farmers.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson?
Terry Richardson, President, Australian Dairy Farmers.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Mumford.
Paul Mumford, I'm the Chair of ADF Markets and Trade Chair, but I'm also the President. Within my role, I am the President of Victorian Farmers United Dairy Farmers of Victoria.
Right, thank you very much. Now I'm going to give you the opportunity to make an opening statement. Would someone like to do that?
Yes, Terry Richardson, Chair. I'll begin.
Thank you.
Look, thank you for the opportunity to present the Australian Dairy Farmers on behalf of Australian Dairy Farmers. Look, just on a personal note, can I start by saying I've listened to the speakers this morning, and like many of them, I've enjoyed being a dairy farmer for a good number of years now, and 45 in fact. At the moment I farm in southwest Victoria, and over the time I've sat at many kitchen tables and shared the hopes and experienced firsthand also the disappointments that we have endured. I've got some understanding of the issues facing the industry from that experience, and I do acknowledge that it's diverse and complex in some regards, and it's tough in many ways. But Australian Dairy Farmers, and amongst all that, we're the national advocacy body representing dairy farmers across the 6 dairying states. Our task is to improve the profitability and sustainability of the dairy farmers in Australia, a task we've been undertaking since 1942. So we're pleased to have the opportunity to highlight some of the key points we made in our submission to you in December 2019. And it's important up front to recognise that dairy is critical to regional jobs and growth. We're a $12 billion industry at farm, manufacturing and export. We're the 4th largest agriculture industry, and around 46,000 people work on Australia's 5,200 dairy farms and within the 140 dairy product manufacturing companies. It's an important part of the retail purchases made by customers across Australia. In fact, we believe that 8 out of 10 Australian adults need to increase their intake of dairy foods to achieve recommended dietary guidelines. We do acknowledge that since deregulation, farm profitability and competitiveness has been impacted in a number of ways, and we do recognise that drought, increasing costs such as electricity, the introduction of aggressive promotion of private label or home brand products by supermarkets, and there's been world price volatility and the international dairy price downturn in the 2015-16 year by the dairy processors had a deep impact on farm profitability. And then additionally, farm gate price growth has not kept up with costs. However, there is no silver bullet to improving dairy farm profitability and competitiveness. Over the past 10 years, there have been 10 parliamentary and industry reviews into the industry, and recommendations that are or should be delivered include the reduction of trade barriers. The government's pursuit of free trade agreements are welcomed by the industry. Increasing marketing. We've made a submission to the Australian government to restore truth in labelling. Currently, plant-based alternative products use dairy terms, and in particular, the word milk, to leverage our brand and nutrition. We believe this is misleading consumers, and it's a clear market failure. And we also want to improve contracting and price setting transparency. The ACCC found that farmers are disadvantaged in contract management, and there are 6 initiatives that are currently being delivered to implement the ACCC's recommendations around the Code of Practice, the Milk Supply Agreement template, advice to help farmers translate contract terms into production and financial implications. There's the milk trading platform, some work on a blockchain strategy, and of course the increased regulated capacity, whereby the ACCC was provided with a dairy specialist position and an additional $8.1 million above the 2020 budget commitment to provide increased support and oversight into the dairy industry. Our efforts, in addition, are turning to the farm, our efforts are continuing to reduce the cost of production and increase productivity. And it's estimated that for the dairy industry, RD&E has accounted for almost half the total productivity gains from 1980 to 2010. Turning to the price intervention, we believe that it should be focused at the retail level. Our analysis based on milk supply and demand found that the price for domestic milk should be at least $1.50 per litre. We've asked the retailers to deliver this immediately, but pass through back to farmers. Unfortunately, they rejected this request after the Minister of Agriculture released a media statement making a similar request on the 6th of May. We've conducted analysis of a number of intervention options available to government and state at all level, and happy to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Sorry, keep going.
Dairy industry statistics, we recognise these are limited by sample size and data collection variability. There is variation across the agencies and between states and territories and between commodities. Our suggestion is for the collection agencies to come together to determine ways that streamline and incentivise contributions. And finally, we believe that Dairy Australia is critical to achieving good industry outcomes, and there are a number of recommendations that we've made to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. So with your permission, Chair, I'll ask Mr. Ernell to speak.
Righto, thank you.
Thank you. David Ernell, Chief Executive Officer. I'll make some brief statements before passing to Paul Mumford. I think it's important that you hear from the other dairy farmer in the ADF delegation this morning. As Mr. Richardson has covered in his opening address, Australian Dairy Farmers has been around for 78 years, and that's a history that we're very proud of. We're a federated structure. Our model has all dairying states as members, except of course the Northern Territory, but all 6 dairying states are members of our organisation, and we work very closely with all of those 6 state members in what is a broad church of issues and ideas, and we deliver policy accordingly. Over time, and maybe even more obvious since deregulation, over time we are seeing development of policy challenging as milk pools shrink, and forming a national view, as I'm sure all of those senators on the committee would appreciate, is never easy. We do that through 5 subcommittees that cover such areas as trade and market access, farming systems, people and capacity, attracting and supporting new entrants in the industry, natural resource management, and animal welfare. As some earlier speakers have said this morning, that we've had significant activity since we lodged our submission 6 months ago, and the development of a national dairy plan will assist all associated organisations as we develop our 5-year plans, and of course the mandatory code of conduct, which has already been covered, and we're happy to speak to that. Mr. Richardson made reference to a market intervention study that we've had commissioned and we've only recently received, and following our testimony this morning, we will happily share that report in full to the committee. Just in some final comments from me, Australian dairy farmers proudly played a key role in breaking the back of dollar milk in February of last year, a concerted effort over 7 or 8 years of many state and national dairying organisations around the country. However, as has been pointed out, 90% of dairy farmers in Australia do not enjoy the returns that came from that increase in price, and hence there's some issues that we can cover today. I'll leave my testimony there with a final comment in terms of the Office of Australian Dairy Farmers. There's no question that we're seeing farmers departing the industry, and 500 in 2018 is a number that's already been covered today. But an associated challenge there, as we see farming numbers across the country reduced, is the capacity and support for farming organisations to deliver appropriate policy analysis and advocacy. Research on behalf of our members is also considerably strained. This organisation, at its peak, employed more than 10 staff. I'm reliably informed that it was 14 at its highest. We now employ 4.6 people. So clearly, when you've got one person per kind of key role, such as policy and communications, we need a considerable amount of support from the states, Dairy Australia, and also proud members of the NFF to work through and deliver the outcomes on behalf of farmers. I'll leave my opening remarks there and pass to Mr Mumford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ennell. Mr Mumford.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I just wanted to introduce myself, that I'm a Gippsland farmer here in Victoria, and my role at ADF is that I'm the chair of the Markets and Trade Committee that assessed many things, and we heard reference to the intervention report from both the previous speakers, which is where we addressed this issue. I just wanted to give you some background on myself, though, as a dairy farmer, that essentially I'm a third-generation dairy farmer, and even though the word Gippsland may give a preconceived idea of green rolling hills, I must say that our own business has had a very traumatic time with the drought over the many years now, and thankfully I can say that we have just come out of it. But I just wanted to clarify there that it's very important for me as a business owner and operator that I understand my farm system and how my farm actually generates profits. I think that's a very important point that we need to make as business owners and business people, and as dairy farmers, we understand that mechanism, and then marry some of the issues that we can actually use, like a mandatory code, like milk price, like payment systems to our business to generate the final return. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Senator.
All right, thank you, Mr Mumford. Look, I might just kick off, and I'll put my questions to you, Mr Ennell, as the CEO. And I know Senator Hanson will come in, as will Senator McDonald, as we move through. And I'll just get the senators to announce who you are so you understand who's asking the question. And likewise, when you answer, if you could just give us your name too, please, as we go. So I'm aware of an $11 million injection into ADF. Well, I'm told of an $11 million injection into ADF that has come from the processors. Is that correct, Mr Ennell?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
And we'll happily provide that question. I can answer that question, but we can also provide written information following this testimony.
That would be good, yep.
Yep, yeah, so certainly assets that were held by the Australian Dairy Industry Council were transferred over to Australian dairy farmers. That transfer should have in fact occurred back in 2003 for reasons not known for us. That was prior to our time. That transfer did not occur. That money was entitled to be held by Australian dairy farmers, and hence we made that transfer last year.
Okie dokie. Please come in.
I just need to ask a question with regards to that.
Senator Hanson.
In 2017-18, it was $33,373,000 was collected by the membership. There was another $20,528,000 given by the government. It's split into two groups. Group A is you've got your membership. Group B is made up of Australian dairy farmers representing New South Wales Farmers Association, Queensland Dairy Farmers Organisation, South Australian Dairy Farmers, Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers Association, Victorian Farmers Federation, United Dairy Farmers and Western Australian Farmers. Now, at that time, through the Australian Dairy Products Federation, ADPF, includes the milk producers. Processors, and it states that the Australian dairy farmers accepted millions of dollars from the processors, and you were actually denying that you've received any money from them at all.
No. So to clarify, the first question was with regard to the transfer of funds into Australian dairy farmers, which was originally to be done in 2003. That money was entitled for Australian dairy farmers. The question that you've just asked, the 33 million and the 20 million, the first part of your question, Senator Hanson, is related to Dairy Australia, levies and matching funds. In terms of funds received from dairy processors, for 6.5 years, Australian dairy farmers had an agreement with a number of processors through the ADIC investment plan to deliver projects and outcomes on behalf of the Australian dairy industry. We reported to those processors against that plan, and that concluded some 12 months, 18 months ago.
Because in from the Dairy Australia's report, in 2019, you received $2.820 million from processors.
There'd be no reference to Australian dairy farmers' income in the Dairy Australia annual report that I'm aware of.
Sorry, just repeat that.
Yeah, so there should or would be no reference to our organisation's income in the Dairy Australia annual report.
Yeah. I just, I cannot understand why the processors would be donating money to the Dairying Association. Why would they be donating money?
So Senator, we certainly wouldn't view that as a donation. The purpose and the intent of that relationship was to deliver through chain outcomes such as energy, such as free trade agreements, trade and market access, environmental, animal welfare, water outcomes. There's a number of important advocacy and research and analysis that this organisation does, which also has benefits to the dairy processing sector. And hence, through the Australian Dairy Industry Council at that time, there was an agreement through the ADIC investment plan to provide that support.
Most of the processors in Australia actually are foreign owned, aren't they? A good part of them. I mean, say they control it, the dairy.
So increasingly so, Senator. I don't believe that was the case at the time of the commencement of this agreement.
Right. I just want to ask you, you've said in your number one, in your submission, that you say reject a minimum farm gate milk price as it would likely diminish incentives to innovate and improve productivity across the supply chain. Would you like to expand on that, please?
Yeah, it's Craig Huff here, Senator, Director of Policy and Strategy. So what happens when you introduce any floor price? You can look at the wool price scheme that was invented in the 70s as an example here, is that it's okay when the market price, so our prices are predominantly based on the global market price, the GDX index. It's okay if the market price is above the floor price, but if it goes below, you're going to have excess supply, which is a problem. And if the price is set at an artificial place, what happens is that producers just produce more as is, and there's no incentive to improve productivity because you're not being competitive. It's an artificial price, you see.
Wouldn't it be the case that if this was actually reviewed twice a year to make sure that it was set at a realistic price? When you've got domestic production at 70%, the milk is consumed in Australia. Why are we then looking at overseas pricing for our domestic market? Wouldn't that then, if we do that, you're only looking after the exporters in this country and you're not looking after our domestic suppliers?
Well, that's the processes who set the farm gate price, as you're aware. But they, yes. So that is a consideration. There's other considerations too, such as the cost of production by state. So pricing differs by regions. Each state have different prices and they have different costs of productions. It is nuanced at a local level as well.
Totally aware of that. They've split it up. The ACCC split it up. There's about 8 different regions throughout Australia. I understand the production cost in each state is totally different, or each region, I should stipulate, and therefore that should be taken into consideration when a review is done. And if you could put in a fair farm gate price for milk, that is actually going to cover production. I don't. The trouble is that the farmers now are so desperate to actually keep their head above water to even think about incentives or growing their businesses when they can't get loans from the banks because their business is going under. But if you were to guarantee them a decent farm gate price for their milk, they can see a future in it and would invest into it. Do you not agree?
No, absolutely we agree. I mean, look, the prices have been increasing, but the problem is that the costs of production have been increasing at a greater rate, and so that's this cost price squeeze that we talk about. That's what's happening. You can make a profit, but you have to be very, very efficient now, and it's becoming harder to do that. I mean, we've in our profitability paper as part of the dairy plan process that Mr. Rinnell outlined. We've got a target of $1.50 EBIT per kilogram of milk solids, and we're saying that currently about 16% of farmers meet that requirement. We have a big variation in terms of the cost of production in this country. We've got some farms that are $4 a kilogram of milk solids, right up to $12 a kilogram of milk solids. There's a big variation, so there's work to be done on the cost side. And the milk price doesn't have as much variation, but certainly that. When we talk about seasonal conditions and drought in the last couple of years and the step-down process and everything, the prices didn't go up at the rate of those did. So we need more bounce there, and particularly at the retail level, which has been, as you know, flat for since 2010-11 when it came in as the discounted dairy products come in. Was brought in to use export market for pricing? And that was stipulated in the last evidence here that was given to us by the New South Wales farmers, who made a comment that they use export market for pricing. Yeah, that's the global price that I mentioned there before. And you're correct that when you're talking 2/3 are more domestic orientated, the relevance of that global market price is lesser. But as I go back to what I said before, each state has different prices, and the costs, typically where there is a higher cost of production, there is a higher milk price. So where it is, so typically Queensland has the higher cost of production, receives the highest price. Tasmania has the lowest cost of production, receives the lowest price. And then there's all the other states in between.
Senator, this is Paul Mumford speaking. Could I just feed into there that we have to, when we look at milk price and costs, we've got to also be concerned that Queensland's milk price is essentially set from Victorian milk price plus freight, because particularly around the domestic market, that if the retailers are there to source milk, they ultimately want the cheapest product that they can actually source. So it's very important that we look at the whole holistic approach of the dairy industry right across Australia and understand that everything is driven by profit. So Queensland prices, milk prices, are driven essentially by the southern states.
I tend to agree with you. You see, the only state that really hasn't lost any of their herd size has been Victoria, because you carry over 1 million head of cattle in Victoria, so you're really driving the milk industry from Victoria, whereas the other states have gone under. And we used to have 1,500 dairy farmers in Queensland. We're down to now 300, New South Wales 17,000 down to 600, yet Victoria has not diminished in the number of herds that they have. And actually in Queensland for production they're usually paid about 59 or 62 cents a litre for milk. Our production, we don't have enough milk to produce for Queensland, and yet if we bring milk up from Victoria, I've been told by the dairy farmers they will actually pay an extra 20 cents a litre directly to Victoria for the milk that they bring up. Is that correct?
Paul Mumford again speaking, Senator. I just highlight the In Focus report from 2019, where it actually does address that Victoria has actually lost cow numbers over that period. I would also highlight that, particularly for the northern part of Victoria here, massive milk loss, along with massive cow losses, have happened in the last 12 months.
Well, there might be in the last 12 months. I haven't got the figures here that I can put my hands on, but your loss of cows in Victoria was next to zilch compared to the other states. So in Australian dairy farmers then, of all the organisations that are on this, as I read out before, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, Victoria, Western Australia, most of the herds come from Victoria. How is, if you're making decisions or representation, is that based on the number of farmers in that state? Is it based on, does everyone have an equal voting right? How's it determined?
It's David Inall here. Thank you for the question. The policy is set through our National Policy Council, which does have a proportional representation based on the states, but not one state, Victoria alone, cannot carry the vote. But yes, Victoria does carry the most number of votes, although any policies and recommendations coming out of our National Policy Council must then move to the ADF board, and they either approve or send that motion back for further debate.
I'm sure all dairy farmers and everyone, it's been through inquiry after inquiry, every recommendation, nothing's happening, the dairy industry is diminishing, do we really have a future for it? A suggestion was actually brought forward before the committee by Dairy Connect, calling for a royal commission into the dairy industry. Would you support that?
So as the national organisation, it's David Inall here, Senator. As the national organisation, we haven't formally considered a Royal Commission. We don't have a view at this stage. For us to, in my previous answer, I think for all good reason, and it's no different, I believe, to a process you would go through there in Canberra in setting policy, we need to manage that discussion through a number of prudent steps. And a stepwise approach to that consideration would be important. We have not discussed or formed a view yet on a Royal Commission into the dairy industry.
One last question. You actually, number 2 of your submission here, what you're saying is introduce a mandatory code of practice. We did that in January. Are you not happy with it, or doesn't it cover all the areas that needs to be covered?
So Craig Huff here again. So the code of practice, so this submission was dated in December last year, so it was prior to the commencement of the code. But we led the development of this code. So we had a voluntary code originally, so that we implemented that almost directly after the step downs happened. And then that was for a year. We made a commitment to review that at the end of the point. I then come on board to this organisation and manage that review, comprehensive review, and the ACCC report was handed out at the time to then introduce this mandatory code. We had we supported the mandatory code, and those clauses that are in there, we designed them, and we designed those clauses 80% of them with processor agreement. And then we handed it over to the department, who then did a national consultation processes on those 20% of areas where we disagreed. So, for example, the cooling off clause there's a point of difference there. 14 days versus 4 days or whatever. And then so that was the focus of their consultation. And then what we've landed now is a code that has all of the states ourselves signed up to. And most of those clauses where there's points of difference came back to what we advocated for as the farmers. So, look, we're happy with it. Yes, there's some tweaks that need to be made, and that's why we inserted a review clause one year after its commencement, so at the end of this year. Yes.
It was brought to my attention about the plight of the dairy farmers that they need this code of practice, which I actually pushed for and got into the Parliament this January. This is totally different. The ACCC had a code of practice that was drawn up there, but it was put to and it was changed quite a bit in the code that we have now at the moment. So when you talk about you supported the code, are you talking about the original ACCC code, or are you talking about the one now that you said, it needs tweaks to it 20%? And are you aware of the first ACCC code and why it was changed? The second one was changed considerably.
So I'm not aware of the ACCC code. All they did in their report, which was released in April 2018, was to recommend a mandatory code of practice. We had a voluntary code of practice prior to that point under the Australian Dairy Industry Council, which is the umbrella organisation where we come together with the processors. But that had, so the ACCC report found that voluntary code had actually improved the terms and conditions of contracts for those who were signatories to the code. But there was limitations with the code, and there was still some breaches for those who were signatories. So, for example, it did not have penalties. It did not have a dispute resolution process. There was certainly no good faith provision. All of those things have been built into this new code that we designed.
Senator, it's David Inall, following from Mr Huff's response. I'd like to make a couple of points if I can. Firstly, just to reconfirm, we are, to the best of our knowledge, the ACCC does not endorse or write codes. Maybe if they're providing evidence today, a question to them may assist in this matter. Secondly, with regard to the voluntary code that Mr Huff has just referenced, it's a key point in the mandatory code discussion. If you look at the threshold test that the federal government, the prism that they look through when implementing codes, they don't just bring in a mandatory code for the sake of a mandatory code. The industry must be able to demonstrate that it has, to the best of its ability, has attempted to work through a process autonomously. And it was the ADIC, in fact, processors and farmers, that put that first code together, which commenced on the 1st of July 2017. So while there's been some observations and criticisms that code didn't deliver, it is worth placing on the record that first code, that voluntary code, needed to start this discussion in the lead up to a mandatory code, which we currently have.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hanson. Before I go to Senator McDonald, Mr Inall, thank you. Can I just clarify? So the $11 million, was that supposed to come to you, did you say, in 2003?
Yes, so we have the documentation to show that money should have been transferred in 2003 over to Australian dairy farmers, and in a review of our archives, we identified that paperwork and that had not occurred, and hence that transfer occurred last year.
Oh, that's good. Okay, thank you, Mr Inall. And for the purposes of assisting the committee in this inquiry, could I ask that you do send that to us, please, provide the committee with that. So where has the $11 million been?
So I'll throw to my chairman here if I can, but the $11 million is currently sitting in trust. We have not drawn down on that $11 million.
Yep.
And as everybody would appreciate, the state of global markets currently, that is now considerably less than $11 million. So we are not drawing down on units.
Okie dokie. So sorry, before you do, all right. Sorry, Mr Richards. I just want to know where it's been. Who had it?
It's currently sitting in trust and awaiting stock market rebound.
So is that the Dairy Products Stabilisation Trust? Or is that
No.
a different one? All right. Okay. Well, just while I'm at that, if you could provide that too, a copy of that, that would be good, please.
We will provide a report with the appropriate documents.
Thank you. That's good. Now, Mr. Richardson, you wanted to add on, because I still want to know who's had it.
Just briefly, that one of the requirements associated with those funds was for them to be used in the interest of the whole of the dairy industry.
No, Mr. Richardson, sorry, I get that, yeah. I just want to know, I wish, look, if this makes it clearer, if it's been held in trust in the Glen Stirl Trust, I'd be really, really happy. All I want to know is who's had the dough? Because has it not, and I know you said it's drawn down and all that, but it hasn't been sitting in a filing cabinet in the back of an office in Melbourne.
So we will provide the documentation which sets out in detail where it has been and then the details of the transfer to ADF.
All right, that's good. Thank you. Now, I'll just quit going through. So can you tell me, is it correct that you, or the ADF, recommended to the Minister for Agriculture that the government should establish a task force to determine actions to resolve issues regarding the price dairy farmers are paid for their product?
It's David Inall here, Senator. Yes, that's correct.
Oh, good, thank you. Would it be possible to assist the committee in its work to provide any correspondence that you have swapped between the Minister relating to the task force?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. And my last one before I go to my co-chair and Senator McDonald. Now, we know you were provided $1 million to develop the payment system using blockchain technology and a new dairy industry trading platform. Has anything happened there? Have you done it?
Yes, Senator. Craig Huff here. So I'm leading those three projects.
Oh, good. Okay.
But I'll just couch it. So what happened prior to the election last year was that we worked with the government to design those pre-election policies. So it's a $22 million package suite of initiatives for the dairy industry. So there's three projects, the 1.1 million for three projects that have come to us, but there's also a range of other projects there. And so we talked about sort of ACCC, they got that $8.1 million as part of that 22 million package to increase the oversight, to provide the education, to do all those things for the industry, including the dairy specialists, which Mr. Richardson outlined. But for our three projects, how we designed it, we thought, well, okay, we've got this code of practice, but to help implement the code and also implement the other recommendations that are in that ACCC report, we need projects to do that. So that's where these come about. So the first project, which has just been delivered, and it was a design of a milk supply agreement template that is code compliant. And so I did that with a couple of lawyers. And we released that prior to the 1st of June when the processors are required to announce their agreements and opening prices. So we were trying to provide some, reducing the regulatory burden, if you like, for the code. So we did that. We delivered nine webinars open webinars to explain the code, explain the template as well. So that was all done prior to the lead up. So that project's done. That's one project. The second project is, we were talking about the blockchain initiative. So we're about to launch a video, an animated video, if you like. It's a 3-minute clip. I've been working with GS1 Australia and CSIRO Data 61 on this project. And essentially it's an explanation video. So it talks about the state of the dairy industry, the ACCC report and its issues, and then it explains blockchain technology, what it is and how it can kind of help with providing a sort of a real-time payment system. It's a distributed ledger technology, so we record the transactions when the milk tanker comes and picks up the milk, and then the payments are made. And we can demonstrate some provenance across the supply chain around that too. So it's starting to build the digitalisation of the supply chain. So that's one output. The second output we're going to do is a guideline around metadata standards, then we're going to do an actual field trial. So that's a 12-month project. And finally, the third project that we've got, which we're doing stakeholder consultation around, is a development of a milk trading platform. So if you think of a financial exchange, milk will be traded on an exchange, in real time. And so what we've developed is 3 presentations essentially. One is the case for change, 2 is the options on what it will look like, and the 3rd one is the market design option. So we're now in the consultation phase of actually, delivering those presentations to stakeholders across the chain.
So in those 9 webinars, I think you said, how many participants were on the end of the computer?
We had anywhere between 20 and 30 people in each one.
Okay.
And a range of people too. So you're talking some Dairy Australia staff. There was actual processors. There was farmers and members and whatnot. So quite varied. So I know you had Sean Morgan on before with Dairy Connect. So he was one of the participants, for example.
Okay. So 20 to 30 times 9, so about 280. What about the ones, is this because others are members of other associations, or how do you get to all of them?
No. So with this one, because it's obviously public money, it's grant money, these webinars weren't open for members, it was open for the public and has to be. It's for that. So it was just an open invitation. We promoted on our website. We've got our state members to promote it through there.
Oh, righto.
Facebook and social media as well. So we did as much as we can prior to try and promote the participation. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And my last one, just sorry, Mr. Richards, thank you, Mr. Enel, Mr. Hoff. Mr. Richardson, when you say the fund has dropped the 11 million, what's it dropped to? Or how much has it dropped to?
I can't give you the exact number. I'll take that on notice and provide that with the other.
Mr. Enel, do you know how much it's dropped down to?
I believe the stock market has gone down around 20%,
okay.
but we can provide further clarity on that.
Yep. All I can say is ouch. Okay, thank you. Senator McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the participants from Australian dairy farmers. Can I start with the research and development and extension monies? Is it right that you direct Dairy Australia in where they're carrying out their research and where they're doing the extension?
Terry Richardson here. Australian dairy farmers' role is, along with the other stakeholder, that's Australian Dairy Products Federation, undertake an annual consultation process with Dairy Australia to set out their annual operating plan, but guiding that, we have an organisation called Dairy Moving Forward, which acts to coordinate the overall strategic direction and coordinate the resourcing of the work that is carried out through Dairy Australia. So there's cross-commodity coordination also to ensure that resources are utilised appropriately, and decisions are based around some specific criteria. So within the Dairy Moving Forward, we have Dairy Australia, but also government, university, the commercial sector, and of course there are farmer representatives participating in that decision-making process.
So I'm interested particularly in the different systems for New South Wales and Queensland, and I have been told that the appropriate development of tropical grasses could lead to as much as a 20% reduction in costs of production for farmers in those areas. But I'm also told that you're hard-pressed to be able to find examples of R&D&E in those spaces in Queensland and New South Wales. What would you say about that?
Look, decisions around the work that's undertaken by Dairy Australia are based on the criteria which provide for geographic needs, route to markets, and of course the return on investment that's made. I don't have the detail of the decisions at the operating level, but we're happy to provide any detail.
So, Senator, it's Craig Huff here again. I might just quickly jump in. So how Dairy Australia is set up, they have what they call regional development programs, and they're clustered according to the dairy region. So subtropical is dairy is essentially sort of northern New South Wales and Queensland, and so they provide the extension. And so what they should be doing is feeding that up and down the chain, and new innovations that come around different pasture varieties or feed-based changes. They extend that work to the farmers. Now we know that there is a bit of a problem with relation to participation in some of those seminars and webinars and that is an issue, but that's sort of how it works. Yeah.
So we've heard from dairy farmers, a dairy farmer this morning, suggesting that when he built his greenfields operation, he had to go to America to get the most current technology and feed regimes and so forth. And I'm curious, because this is a consistent discussion about what sort of best practice has been generated by Dairy Australia and disseminated through the peak bodies. I mean, what would you say to that? That sounds pretty disturbing if world's best practice is coming out of another country when, we spend a significant amount of money on research levies into Australian practices.
It's Terry Richardson here, Senator. I know that for an organisation like Dairy Australia, they do access knowledge and technical advice from a number of sources. And if we look amongst our own dairy farming base, many who will go outside the Dairy Australia structure, and for example, a lot of pasture-based knowledge comes from Ireland and New Zealand and is incorporated into farming practices here. So Dairy Australia does provide a role of coordinating resources from a number of places. And so I think for us to expect that Dairy Australia would have on hand all the resources and personnel required to cover all farming systems and management practices, it might be more than we could reasonably expect.
I appreciate what you're saying, but if there is, if there is a view from the levy payers, being the producers, that best practice is coming from other countries and there would be up to a 20% cost reduction if there was better R&D available in the northern production systems, surely that should be an urgent focus.
Senator, it's David Inall here. 2 points if I can, and I can see Terry would like to follow. Two points if I can. Firstly, while I'm sure Dairy Australia would be able to provide greater insight into this, my understanding of the challenge with the northern pasture issues that you referred to is around commercialisation of the product, and any research and potential outcome there, finding a partner that is willing to invest and commercialise it, I believe, has been a challenge, but there would be others who could shed more light on that. Secondly, I think it's important to notice that with regard to the Australian Dairy Plan, it is leading us to the point of having a 5-year plan where Australian Dairy Products Federation, the processor representative organisation, ourselves and Dairy Australia have come together to develop a 5-year strategic plan for the dairy industry, and issues such as this one, for example, will provide us greater insight as to what the industry needs. We recognise there are different farming systems that over the past 5 years, since the last 5-year Dairy Australia strategic plan was prepared, have become more visible, and there will be a call for a reallocation of resources in some areas. So we are certainly aware that total mixed ration systems or partial mixed ration systems are becoming increasingly popular, and I'm confident that that will factor into a reallocation in the next 5 years.
All right. We'll hear from Queensland Dairy Organisation later, so they'll probably have some additional comments to make. I want to move to, you made some comments around blockchain and using that for product traceability. I'm curious that we've had several groups now talk about truth in labelling around milk, and just wondered what role has ADF taken in strongly pushing back on the misleading labelling that's happening on some of the products that are on dairy shelves.
Yeah, Craig Huff here again. Good question. So this is a bit of an ongoing battle, this one. So we wrote to the former Minister Mackenzie and also Minister Colbeck, who is the chair of the Forum of Food Regulators. So that's where the Commonwealth comes together with the state regulators to look at everything around food safety, food labelling, all that sort of thing. And we used the clause in the Food Standards Code, which clearly says that the definition of milk is from a mammary secretion of an animal, and so therefore to use that on plant-based product is clearly inconsistent with the clause with that definition. But there is a clause in the Food Standards Code which actually permits that to occur, and so therefore the regulators can't do the enforcement. So we've suggested that clause be removed from that, and also, you know, do a broader review of truth in labelling. So it's not just an issue with milk. There's, you know, for consumers, there's some misleading around, you know, sugar content and all the rest of it in the nutritional ingredients that are at the back of the label. So, you know, so it's a broader conversation. So that's what we've suggested. So what happened? It was debated in November. Some of the states, most of the states, rejected that call based on an options paper that the department did, and we've looked at that and now said, well, okay, well maybe we can get it on ingredients, or what we call compositional comparity, but there's more issues there, and we think our first policy position is much you know, stronger. So that could be an addendum potentially, but needs further research. So it's at a bit of a stalemate, I guess, is the answer.
Senator, it's Paul Mumford. If I could just follow on from that with my role with markets and trade for ADF, you know, there are many issues out there that we actually have to make sure that work for the dairy industry. Like Craig has just mentioned about labelling issues are high priority, but there's also major issues coming into the future, like geographical indicators here in Australia is a really big issue that will impact Australian farmers, and we must make sure as a national body that we can mitigate any of those issues that might be inflicted. So country of origin and health star ratings are also two high priority topics that ADF is looking at right at the moment.
So just to be clear then, the reason why you couldn't get agreement from the states on truth in labelling on milk for plant-based products is because of an options paper put up by the Federal Department of Agriculture, is that right?
I think it was the federal department that wrote it, but you know, all the states would have been briefing themselves. But I think that we've had a look at the meeting outcomes, and we don't think there's a strong justification for the rejection. You know, and that's available online. So we've requested that to occur, but at a high level, I think what they're saying is that there's not enough evidence that they're seeing that consumers are being misled. But we have some evidence to the contrary, and we're going to provide that.
Terrific. All right, well, the department's coming in later this afternoon, so hopefully they'll be prepared for that. The second is truth in labelling around Australian-owned companies presenting milk that they're importing from New Zealand, processing in Australia, or cheese that's coming in, and they're implying that it's Australian produced or Australian made. Have you got any views on that?
Paul Mumford speaking here. Senator, I only know the reference from social media posts. I believe that it's a New Zealand cheese coming into Australia and sold under the assumption to the retailers, to the consumers, that it's Australian owned. I know about the issue, and through my own state role here in Victoria, we have been dealing with it in our state.
All right, well, I think that's something that we need to be, we'll be asking some questions. I'll be asking some questions of the ACCC later, because if there's a suggestion that there's dumping happening and the country of origin is not clear, then I think that's a serious issue that they should be taking accountability for.
I would just put in there also too, Senator, is that I believe that the licence for that name was taken out some 4 or 5 years ago, and it has an expiry date on it, is how I understand that particular product.
All right, just one last question, Chair. Thank you. I want to talk to you about competition policy. We just had a very good presentation from New South Wales Farmers Federation around the last 20 years and their suggestion that deregulation was just a financial package, but there wasn't a competition package that went with it. What recommendations are you making about changes to the ACCC powers? What recommendations are you making in this space?
Yeah, so Craig Huff here again. So look, we haven't analysed this in detail, and we do think this is probably a role for the National Farmers Federation to scrutinise, and we'll do that through their committee structures. And I know New South Wales Farmers have been leading that work, and certainly hasn't come through our Markets and Trade Committee, which Paul looks at. Look, I would just probably basically say that, like, I think the question's probably more for the ACCC, because they've done a fair bit of work on the Competition Consumer Act. Yeah, that's all I could probably say.
Well, I would suggest to you that as the peak body, if you don't have a strong view, you can be pretty confident you're not going to get an outcome. So I hope that might be a topic that you take up at your next meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator McDonald. And my last one, this is an easy one. Mr Inall, I know you haven't been around that long, but you are the CEO, so I'll put it to you, but anyone can feel free to answer. The Queensland dairy farmers, who are up next, I think, have been scathing in their assessment of Dairy Australia, and I'll just quickly quote here that the QDO believes Dairy Australia is not effectively held by checks and balances by industry representative organisations, and as such does not support the best interests of the dairy industry, farmers or the government. Would or does Australian dairy farmers share the same view as your Queensland counterparts?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. David Inall speaking. So we are aware of the views they're held by QDO as a part of their submission, and we also, per my opening remarks, we have 5 other state organisations that also have a broad range of views. We do work closely with Dairy Australia, and we're always looking for ways in which we can provide advice and greater oversight to the best that we can. I am aware, I see that there are many programs that Dairy Australia runs, whether it's the Dairy Fee-Based program, whether it's Dairy Bio. They have focus farms, which I know the 2 farmers in the room would be happy to speak to, Datagene. There's many areas where we know Dairy Australia works. We've also, Mr Huff can also speak to our submission, which we're also happy to provide, on modernising the research and development system, where we've identified areas for improvement as well.
Well, Mr Inall, you may be newer to the association, but you've certainly been around, because you sound just like a department official answering our Senate estimates questions. And that's not having a whack at you. Don't have a glass jaw. That was very clear that you have other interests you have to balance. Okie dokie. On that, gentlemen, thank you very much.